Hi, I'm Marty Nimko. Yesterday I read the Wall Street Journal's lead editorial. It was called The Real BidenHarris Economic Record. The pull-out quote, "A government spending boom fueled inflation that has crushed real average incomes." I'd like to read it to you because it was pretty compelling. It's by not one author, but by the Wall Street Journal's editorial board. Kamala Harris, or Kamala Harris, some people are saying that we need to pronounce it Kamala, plans to roll out her economic priorities in a speech on Friday. That would be today. Though leaks to the press say not to expect much different than the last 4 years. That's bad news because the Biden-Harris economic record has left most Americans worse off than they were 4 years ago. The evidence is indisputable. President Biden claims that he inherited the worst economy since the Great Depression, but this isn't close to true. The economy in January 21 was fast recovering from the pandemic as vaccines rolled out and state lockdowns eased. GDP grew 35% in the third quarter of 2020, 4% in the fourth, and 5% in the first quarter of 21. By the end of the first quarter, real GDP had returned to its pre-pandemic high. All Mr. Biden had to do was let the recovery unfold. Instead, Democrats in March 2021 used COVID, quote, relief as a pretext to pass $1.9 trillion in new spending. This was more than double Barack Obama's 2009 spending bonanza. State and local governments were the biggest beneficiaries, receiving $350 billion in direct aid, $122 billion for K-12 schools, and $30 billion for mass transit, insolvent union pension funds, who received an $86 billion rescue. The rest was mostly transfer payments to individuals, including a 5-month extension of enhanced unemployment benefits, a $3,600 fully refundable child tax credit, $1,400 stimulus payments per person, sweetened Affordable Care Act subsidies, an increased earned income tax credit, including for folks who didn't work, housing subsidies, and so much more. The handouts discouraged the unemployed from returning to work and fueled consumer spending, which was already primed to surge owing to pent-up savings from the COVID lockdowns and spending under Donald Trump. By mid-2021, Americans had $2.3 trillion in, quote, excess savings relative to pre-pandemic levels, equivalent to roughly 12.5% of disposable income. So much money chasing too few goods fueled inflation, which was supercharged by the Federal Reserve's accommodative policy. Historically low mortgage rates drove up housing prices. The White House blamed, quote, corporate greed, end quote, for inflation that peaked at 9.1% in June 22, even as the spending party in Washington continued. In November 2021, Congress passed a $1 trillion bill full of green pork and more money for states. Then came the $280 billion CHIPS Act and Mr. Biden's Green New Deal, which he also called the Inflation Reduction Act, which Goldman Sachs estimates will cost $1.2 trillion over a decade. Such heaps of government spending have distorted private investment. While investment in new factories has grown, spending on research and development and new equipment has slowed. Overall, private fixed investment has grown at roughly half the rate under Mr. Biden as it did under Mr. Trump. Manufacturing output remains lower than before the pandemic. Magnifying market misallocations, the administration conditions subsidies on businesses advancing its priorities, such as paying union-level wages and providing child care to workers. It also boosted food stamps, expanded eligibility for Obamacare subsidies, and waved away hundreds of billions of dollars in student debt. The result, $5.8 trillion in deficits during Mr. Biden's first 3 years, about twice as much as during Donald Trump's, and the highest inflation in 4 decades. Prices have increased by nearly 20% since January 2021. compared to 7.8% during the Trump presidency. Inflation-adjusted average weekly earnings are down 3.9% since Mr. Biden entered office, compared to an increase of 2.6% during Mr. Trump's first 3 years. Real wages increased much more in 2020, but partly owing to statistical artifacts. Higher interest rates are finally bringing inflation under control, which is allowing real wages to rise again. But the Federal Reserve had to raise rates higher than it otherwise would have to offset the monetary and fiscal gusher. The higher rates have pushed up mortgage costs for new home buyers. 3 years of inflation and higher interest rates are stretching American pocketbooks, especially for lower-income workers. Seriously delinquent auto loans and credit cards are higher than any time since the immediate aftermath of the 2008 and 9 recession. Ms. Harris boasts that the economy has added nearly 16 million jobs during the Biden presidency, compared with 6.4 million during Mr. Trump's first 3 years. But most of these, quote, new jobs are backfilling losses from the pandemic lockdowns. The U.S. has fewer jobs than it was on track to add before the pandemic. What's more, all the Biden-Harris spending has yielded little economic bang for the taxpayer buck. Washington has borrowed more than $400,000 for every additional job added under Mr. Biden, compared to Mr. Trump's first 3 years. Most new jobs are concentrated in government, healthcare, and social assistance, 60% of new jobs in the last year. Administrative agencies are also creating uncertainty by blitzing businesses with costly regulations. For example, expanding overtime pay, restricting independent contractors, setting stricter emission standards on power plants and factories, micromanaging broadband build-out, and requiring CO2 emission calculations in environmental reviews. The economy is still expanding, but business investment has slowed. And although the affluent are doing relatively well because of buoyant asset prices, surveys show that most Americans feel financially insecure. Thus, another political paradox of the Biden-Harris years: socioeconomic disparities have increased. Ms. Harris is promising the same economic policies with shinier countenance. Don't expect better results. I want to add that her recent statements and recently reported past statements suggest that she's going to be far more redistributive. That means redistribution from the people who have been the most productive in this society and companies to other people. That cannot bode well. In any event, I wanted to read that to you. I think it's an important article, important op-ed about the disparity between what the mainstream media, except here for the Wall Street Journal's editorial, reported about what her economic policies and Biden's economic policies have done and what she's claiming now. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. And certainly welcome you taking a look at any of my 34 books. Probably the most relevant to this is the book Thought Experiments, but all 34 are on Amazon. Just go there, search on my name, Marty Nemko, Nemko, and you'll find more than you can stomach. It's midnight here, and so I probably sound tired, but I wanted to get this to you before I went to bed. In any event, I thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nemko.